Skill expression in FPS games is a topic full of never-ending debates, especially when we're talking about movement techniques and exploits in FPS games. Been seeing a lot of this on Twitter recently with the new Call of Duty. In Halo, this has been an ongoing discussion for over a decade. If you watch my content, you'd know I'm a fan of Halo 5 and Halo Infinite's movement. Whether intentional or not, I think it adds skill and creativity to combat encounters in the game, and it's just fun to master. Every once in a while, though, I get some pretty insightful comments from viewers that disagree with me. In my recent video about the snap slide, an unintentional technique that lets you boost off ramps by precisely turning and timing your slide as you land, I got a comment from this viewer, Alondite MX, who believes that techniques like snap sliding are not skillful and they're actually poor game design. It was an interesting comment, so I replied to it, and this sort of launched into a little debate about skill gaps in Halo and video games in general. So today, I'm going to share this conversation with you guys in the form of a rant. I'm going to read these comments out loud and discuss skill expression across different Halo titles. We also talk about different games like Smash Bros. Melee. We relate the mastery of gaming to mastery of musical instruments. We talk about chess. It's quite a rant. Now, Halo is, of course, much more than just a competitive game, so this video is only focused on finding the best ways to make the competitive side of Halo Infinite the most skillful it's ever been. And if you like the sound of that, you got some good ideas, then drop a comment below. Who knows? Maybe I'll share it in a future video.
They can make such a big influence. They are always in the hands of the likes of Lucid and Trippy.
Oh my God, Lucid, you are an absolute beast, able to repulse his way out of that scenario. I don't know how Lucid's alive, but now he's getting kills on the board.
Skill gap is a garbage concept that should have no place in game design or video game discussion. Coming in hot, the correct concept is skill ceiling, or rather, the maximum amount of skill that a game is capable of representing. Certain aspects of Halo, like the snap slide, do not give more skilled players an opportunity to leverage their skill to create an advantage. It creates artificial skill difference by requiring the player to understand special case knowledge that is not available in-game and can only be discovered by accident. It functionally adds nothing to gameplay because it doesn't contribute or affect interplay and only forces players to jump through an arbitrary hoop. Nerfing the slide does not reduce the skill ceiling, it reduces the artificially inflated difference in skill between players to better reflect actual skill, i.e. the kind the game is programmed to respond to and measure. Okay, interesting. And of course, I left my own long-winded reply, and I'll get to that. But just interesting that he would say, so any special case knowledge that's not available in-game and only discovered by accident is not skillful. It's artificial, not like true skill. Actual skill is, I guess, anything that is available in-game and doesn't need to be discovered accidentally, just discovered through playtime. Like, how much of Halo is actually explained to the player, though, right? Like, what is available to the... Like, it's not like the game explains where to crouch jump or to strong side to tuck in your head and stay alive, or explains the spawn system to you. Like, it doesn't explain any of that. It doesn't explain that if you pull back on the left stick while you're clambering, you can cancel your clamber, or if you nade into clamber, you cancel your nade animation into a clamber, or if you Y button the weapon switch, you cancel your nade throw into an immediate sprint, right? Like, there's so many little layers of this game that I would consider special case knowledge that are discovered, I guess, by accident or through, playtime, through experience. If anything, special case knowledge is a defining part of skill expression in Halo and video games in general. Like, take the spawn system in Halo CE. For example, understanding the spawn system is like a science in Halo CE. You can very specifically spawn your teammate and your opponent where you want them to, or force random spawns. And understanding how that works based off of your perfect positioning, I don't even really know it myself, to be honest, but that is a fundamental component of skill expression in Halo CE. Halo 3 has something called dirtying weapons. If you haven't heard of it, it's where, interestingly, this is unique to Halo 3, weapons spawn in the air and they fall to the floor. If you catch a weapon as it spawns before it hits the floor and you keep moving with it, you can actually freeze the weapon timer, and that timer won't start for the next weapon spawn till you stop moving, which is super interesting. But basically, pro players will catch a weapon off spawn in the air. They'll know the spawn time. They'll catch it, and then they'll move around for like 15, 20 seconds, stop moving. They've now shifted the spawn timer forward by an extra 20 seconds, and only they and their team know that, and their opponents don't. And that's a layer of depth and I would say skill in the grand scheme of things to have the knowledge and the experience to understand how to weave that into your gameplay. I think what he's getting at is, if I know something that somebody else doesn't know, and I use my knowledge of that thing to beat somebody else who doesn't know about it, And my victory is not skillful because I'm using some special case knowledge to win the exchange, let's say, which I can understand at like a lower level, you know, in like a casual context. But in competitive, the pursuit of that knowledge is, you know, on both sides, right? Like if I have a special case knowledge, it's equally available, that special case knowledge, to the competitor. If you want to be the best player, you're going to learn from this experience and acquire the special case knowledge so that we can play on the same field. That's the depth, and that's the interest, the excitement about it, I think, at least. Anyway, here's my reply. I said, quite the convoluted passage, my dude. Nearly all important knowledge required to hit the skill ceiling you're referring to is not available in-game. The game doesn't explain spawns to you. Heck, it doesn't even tell you where to crouch jump to skip your clamber or strong side to tuck your head in as you escape. More special case techniques. How snap sliding was discovered is irrelevant. It's equally available for everyone to master. Its use in gameplay requires intention and produces consistent, reliable results to those who execute it properly. It absolutely gives more skilled players an opportunity to leverage their skill to create advantages in gameplay. It gives players more intimate control of their timing and positioning, which can be the difference between winning and losing a combat encounter or capitalizing on important opportunities during gameplay. And just to elaborate on that, it's not just like you're snap sliding and mindlessly throwing yourself around the map. Like, you can use it for a slightly faster rotation to improve your timing in a situation, or you know, like the subtleties of it is the beauty of it too. Just being able to slightly more quickly slide up a staircase to get an angle on somebody grabbing camo at the last second, so you can kind of capitalize on that opportunity. Or during, you know, interplay, which is the word that he used. In a 1v1, it's difficult to weave in, but can be done to, you know, maybe navigate in around fights, or if you're weak in a fight, you might be able to reposition quickly if used effectively, especially if you slide off into snap slide. Certain areas you can, you know, access it more quickly, and there's a flexibility and a variance to it. I also see skill gap and skill ceiling as interchangeable terms. Anything that widens the gap between two players also adds to the total sum of skill expression in the game. I found it very interesting that he would say that skill gap is a garbage concept, but skill ceiling is what we should be talking about. Like, they both complement each other, right? Like, if there's a skill gap, the skill ceiling is higher. All right, so here's the reply. He said, you didn't address the lone point of my post, that it artificially inflates the relative skill levels of players in addition to being a special case. Also, all of your other special case examples aren't special cases at all and are observable in-game and don't require trial and error or accident to learn. Now, the examples I used were crouch jumping, strong siding, and the spawn system. Now, crouch jumping, strong siding, maybe you could say is like more of an intuitive action, but the spawn system, like I would say that does require a lot of trial and error of you know, standing in a certain place, getting a kill, seeing where the guy spawns. And infinite spawns are actually pretty random within the open perimeter. They tend to be a lot more random. Past Halo games, they were very precise, and depending on where you stood, you would get the exact spawn that you wanted, which honestly I miss about Halo. I found that to be much more skillful than this randomness, and then this need to create a perimeter. Halo Infinite spawns try to create a perimeter for you by spawning your teammates in complementary perimeter locations to give you map control, basically, which I'm not a fan of that personally. Past Halo games did it better. Anyway, he said, and please don't discuss skill without placing it into the context of the Descartes system. I had never heard of this. I looked it up. It stands, hold on, it stands for dexterity, knowledge, adaptation, reflex, and timing. There's a whole blog on it. I can link that in the description of this video. I didn't read it. It's just a whole in-depth discussion about skill. And I do agree with him here in that where he says, I mean, what is skill? What constitutes more or less skill, etc.? Skill is a messy discussion. It's an utter disaster without proper context. Sure, you know, it's a pretty, you know, subjective conversation. So then I said, how is it artificial exactly? Something as simple as crouch jumping at one point in time required trial and error to master. A more complex example might be perfectly nating weapons or combat evolving weapons to you. It requires a precise lineup. You got to go in a custom lobby and throw like 15, 20 nades until you get the launch into your hands that you're looking for. And now you have special case knowledge. And in Halo, this is some well-respected special case knowledge to be able to combat evolve a weapon to you to get the intended result every time. I said, whether or not something is skillful comes down to the difficulty required to execute it properly, the advantage it creates, and whether that advantage is offset by an acceptable amount of risk to ensure the balance of gameplay overall isn't compromised. So this is my opinion, of course, but take snap sliding. Snap sliding has a lot of risk associated with it. The lineup process of precisely landing on the part of the ramp you need to land on. And you do that through jumping and pointing the wrong direction, not preparing yourself for a gunfight, taking free shots. The process of flying outwards afterwards and hoping that you picked a good timing for your launch, because if you didn't, you're committed to the trajectory. You're vulnerable to free shots on top of screwing up your own reticle placement as you fly by. It's not easy to hit shots when you're moving quickly. So there's a lot of risk on top of the difficulty, the precision with your sticks and the timing of your crouch and your jump to execute it properly in the way that you intended and not, hit a wall on the way, right? So I feel, at least in what I say in the bottom of this, with my experience and my, watching a lot of pros use it, it offers a unique advantage that is consistent and reliable, while risky and difficult enough to not cancel out the value of other important gameplay strategies. And that's the key balance component right there. As long as the other important fundamentals, like having good positioning in a gunfight, remain intact, which they do, then I would say fair game. Now, things get interesting here. He says it's artificial because the same thing can be achieved simply by increasing the momentum conserved by the slide without requiring extra button inputs. For the record, snap sliding, curb sliding, there's no extra button input required to do any of that. It's precise, controller stick movement and crouch timing with the same number of inputs. It's just a, layer of precision. We'll get to it. Because it requires players to figuratively jump through hoops to perform an action that is generally preferable to an unboosted slide. It's like L canceling in Smash Melee. I love that he's talking about Melee. Melee fans think that adding an arbitrary, and in brackets absolutely required at top level play, button press after every aerial attack makes the game more technical and better. It doesn't. The same effect could be achieved simply by cutting the native landing lag of aerials in half, instead of requiring a button input to do it, without requiring superfluous button presses or even having to know that L canceling is in the game. It also doesn't contribute death. It's an extraneous action removed from the primary function. It's primarily useful at top level, where it becomes, or would eventually become, less of an advantage and more of a necessity to stay above the floor of competitive play. So it doesn't contribute depth, but it does offer an advantage, meaning it's confusing. It doesn't so much as raise the skill ceiling as much as it does raise the skill floor for high level play. Okay. And that's problematic because it doesn't contribute anything meaningful to the actual gameplay experience, while also being discouraging to less skilled players who feel they have to learn all of these obtuse techs to reach the top level, rather than being able to simply reach it simply by being good at executing the game's primary functions and learning what is intuitively communicated by the game. Something as simple as crouch jumping at one point in time required trial and error to master. Mastery is not trial and error. Trial and error is when, for example, a game does not intuitively communicate the necessary information to the player, so the player is forced to try things at random, or when you randomly make inputs in different combinations. Okay, crouch jumping is a natural product of Halo's concrete collision and level design. Something that's, okay. What about combat evolving? Doesn't contradict Halo's skill design, because it's not a high dexterous maneuver, because Halo is not a game that stresses frequency dexterity. Interesting. He's saying that's just not Halo, is what he's saying, which is entirely his own opinion. And then there's the matter of the shape of Halo's skill spectrum and how it stresses each of the 5 main components of skill. Okay, tech like snap sliding does not conform to the shape of it. He's lost me here. Shape of Halo's skill spectrum, because it's stresses frequency dexterity, which is otherwise almost entirely absent from Halo's gameplay. Halo is not StarCraft. It's not a high APM game, and people don't play it for frequency dexterity challenge. There are better, more effective ways to raise Halo's skill ceiling while also increasing its depth and improving gameplay as a whole for players at every skill level, and without expecting them to learn unintuitive tech. I'm all for including more skill gaps, though. I do agree there's more ways to increase Halo's skill ceiling. We can touch on that too. Okay, this is getting kind of spicy, right? We got a lot of components to talk about here. But first, just what he said with simply increasing the momentum conserved by the slide without requiring extra button inputs. Now, I did say there is no extra input required, but this is where the balancing act of everything comes into play, though, right? Like, the reason why snap sliding works in its current state is because of how difficult it is to perform and how niche it is as a result of the difficulty and the risk associated. If you make increased momentum too easy and too accessible, now you're fundamentally changing the game. Now everybody's sliding around like a maniac, no frills, no problem. That's going to hurt balance. That's a problem, right? So it's a tricky balancing act. You can end up with a slide that's too powerful by making faster slides too easy to perform. Right now it's in a good spot. If you make it too accessible, you're going to fundamentally change the game. So it's not that it's not possible to make a change here. It's that be careful, right? And for Melee, it's the same thing. Now, as a Melee player, this is perfect. For Melee, I see where you're coming from in that L canceling. So for those who don't know Melee, basically when you do an aerial attack, an attack in the air, and you land on the floor, there's a landing lag when you hit the floor. It takes a certain amount of time to perform another action after you hit the floor from performing an aerial. In Melee, there's this, and actually Smash 64, there's this unique mechanic where if you press the left trigger or right trigger within 7 frames of touching the floor, you actually cancel that landing lag and you can instantly act again out of your attack, allowing you to perform combos that previously were not possible. Basically, it's pretty cool. What he's saying is to remove that, is to make it so that you don't have to press this button and that you just can hit the combo now. The landing lag is cut and everybody has access to these combos. That's another very tricky balancing act. Like, yes, L canceling is a barrier for new players because having to perfectly press that button can be difficult, take some time and practice. But if you open the floodgates and make it possible for everyone to just hit these flowchart combos, and what I say right here is that without L canceling, flowchart combos would be easier and more powerful in 0 to death combos, which is already a thing in Melee. Like if you take a hit in Melee against a good player, he's going to combo you straight to your death. Those will be much more accessible for everybody. So these combos will become commonplace, which means there's less opportunity for counterplay, and it would hurt the game balance, and it would make it less exciting because you'd see it more often. There's also so many layers to L canceling that make it such an interesting and exciting component of the game. Like, it's not just like you're doing an aerial and then hitting the L button before you hit the floor, and it's like the same every time. There's a layer of depth to it where, depending on, like, let's say your opponent's shielding, depending on where the aerial hits the shield, your timing when you hit the floor needs to change. You have to be able to adapt on the fly depending on where you attack the opponent and time your left trigger accordingly, or you can miss your timing. And your opponent can actually angle the position of a shield to throw off the placement of your aerial on the shield so that your timing is thrown off as well. And there's a mental, mind game behind understanding and maximizing your potential there, and also executing very low aerials that are close to the floor so that your opponent, even if he does move the shield, can't alter your timing too much. So he's basically saying, for the sake of accessibility, let's remove a huge component of the game's depth, skill expression, and really balance in the end of the day. Like, that's a big, risky move to make, and I don't think it's going to benefit Melee. That's a big part of its... yes, I can understand from a new player perspective, it's like a barrier or it's an extra button you got to press, but for a pro, that's a huge part of the game's identity. That's a very exciting facet of combat or, counterplay and whatnot in the game. Now, snap sliding is not like L canceling, though. L canceling, everybody has to do it just to do a combo. Snap sliding is not a necessity. It's never going to be a necessity, even at the top level. Maybe for a starting strat, right? Like a popular snap slide starting strat might catch on, but Halo is an aim and positioning game in the end of the day. You can choose to never snap slide and play at the highest level, hang with the pros, if you like, though I do say eventually you probably are going to want to learn how to incorporate it to be the best player. The best player is always going to seek more knowledge and more mastery, I assume, because their objective is to be the best. But that's the beauty of Halo, is it is an aim and positioning game. You don't have to consult snap sliding if you don't want to. Curb sliding, I say, on the other hand, is more of a necessity, but it's easy and accessible to perform the basics. That's honestly the beauty of curb sliding, I think, in Infinite. And the perfect skill gap, really, in Halo is one that is at a low level accessible. Curb sliding is very easy. You just sprint, slide off a low ledge. But to maximize the potential and to fully master the technique, there's a lot of difficulty in timing and precision associated with hitting the tall ledges and hitting them with the maximum boost and with the right angle, right? That's, in my opinion, that's the perfect skill gap. It's accessible but deep for the competitive players. He then mentioned that mastery is not trial and error. Trial and error is, and he's given me like a definition of trial and error. But mastery initially comes from the process of trial and error, does it not? Like, take a skill jump. Learning a skill jump in Halo starts with some trial and error, where to jump and the timing and everything. But then once you start to figure it out, it's that repetition, you start to develop the skill and the mastery and the understanding. Same with snap sliding. It occurs intuitively. It's a chance encounter. And then it's your curiosity and your intention that unlocks it. And that is skillful. That requires skill and creativity. And I find that exciting. Like, how is that not? I don't know. What happened to childlike wonder of learning new techniques that are completely unique to a video game and mastering it and gaining that little edge because of it. Like, that's personally for me, that's what I love about gaming. It's interesting, just that, you know, it's all subjective, I guess, in the end of the day. But then he's talking about dexterity and that Halo is not a high APM game. That's just not Halo. Here's 2 examples. Halo 2 is touted as the best competitive multiplayer of all time by any OG Halo pro. They're going to tell you Halo 2 is the best. There's some CE purists, but it's Halo 2 mostly. And that is a very high dexterous game. I mean, the APM in that game, when you're BXRing, hitting double shots and excessive combos, like the APM's insane in that game. And by the way, in terms of like special case knowledge, like this is probably the most special case of knowledge ever. The double shot and the BR, like what, I mean, an example of an exploit in the most obvious way. Your RRX shoots 2 shots in quick succession, then chokes your BR and autofills your reload. Just mysteriously, your gun just reloads, but you can stop the choke in the BR and then shoot immediately if you YY, switch weapons twice to bring the gun back up, and then you have a chance to RRX once again. Really interesting tech, honestly, though when it comes down to balance, Halo 2's mechanics, I think today in the conversation of balance, wouldn't fare as well as they might have back in Halo 2. There was more discourse. Nowadays, with the presence of things like macros, and just somebody can just create a program and perfectly hit the RRXYY like every time, on top of the fact that because it was so powerful, it made the BR so fundamentally important. Like the difference between you knowing how to double shot and not meant that you killed somebody 2 times faster in a gunfight. That's, from a balance perspective, that's a big change in gameplay as opposed to being able to slide. Like sliding quickly doesn't change the gunfight. You still have to put the same amount of work into getting the kill. But with Halo 2, it's a little different, right? You're fundamentally killing players faster. You're making the BR a very dominant part of the sandbox overall. So balancing-wise, it's a tough one, right? But it is very skillful. That's why it's a very cool mechanic. And don't even get me started with Halo 5. My God, the dexterity required for the movement in that game, you could argue, is more so than any other FPS, to be honest. The techniques, the amount of techniques and their adverse effect on combat and the room for individual skill expression in that game is absolutely insane. I honestly miss being able to solo queue 2v2s, and occasionally my teammate would maybe lag out, let's say, and it would be a 2v1. And if you're skilled enough, because of the skill expression in Halo 5, like you could outplay 2 people and take them on and still win in a 2v1. In Infinite, that's basically impossible. The power of the sandbox and the availability of all these weapons are just so oppressive, and the limited tools you have to outplay make it basically impossible. You're not going to be able to take on more than 1 player. And most pro players today are Halo 5 players. Like the best players in the world, Lucid, you're looking at, you know, most of Optic, maybe minus Forble, Cloud9 it's all Halo 5 players. Everyone at the top level and in the AM scene as well come from Halo 5 and respect that level of dexterity and skill. Being dexterous is inherently skillful, and I say like mastering an instrument. It takes practice and dedication to master your input and incorporate the game's full suite of techniques properly. I don't personally see this as a negative thing. I can understand, and this might have been a difficulty with Halo 5, the idea of a skill floor. There's a lot of techniques in Halo 5. It was maybe less accessible for newer players, and so accessibility is important at a low level. But when it comes to, being a competitive game, the more skill expression, the merrier, right? You want that. It shouldn't deter people. It should be inspiring. I see these advanced techniques and this room for outplayability as inspiring. It's why I play these games. So just to kind of play devil's advocate on, people seeing a slide and being discouraged, some people see that stuff and they get inspired, is why they play. So the last thing I say here is that I welcome all forms of skill expression. The more the merrier. Why remove a layer of depth to add others when adding others might complement what's already there? Why remove the snap slide when, let's say you want to remove the visible weapon timer so that you have to internally remember when weapons spawn? Just do that, right? Now there's another layer of depth, and we can snap slide as well, right? Like that, they could complement each other. I'm all for adding more skill. The question now is, how would you do it? What would it look like, right? And I say, unless you're turning Halo Infinite into something entirely different, i.e. Counter-Strike, something to remember with Halo is that Halo is still a console FPS for controller. Fundamentally, that's kind of how it was designed. Classic Halo games, you move around at full speed, but your gun still shoots straight, right? Like your gun mechanics it's not like you're becoming less accurate as you're moving around, it is still a movement shooter. The movement has evolved quite a bit over the years, but, you know, you're shooting laser beams if you've got the right weapon, let's say. So, are you saying to fundamentally change aiming and shooting mechanics and then change the game? Like, and I'm open to making weapons more difficult to shoot, right? Like, I like the change to the BR recently. That makes it more challenging. They did the opposite with the Commando. Now the thing's a laser beam and everybody's melting people, right? So, you know, making weapons more challenging. The S7 sniper in Infinite is highly skillful. More of that, you know, having more consistency though. The sniper in Infinite has like a bit of randomness when you no scope it, maybe having less of that, you know, like there's a lot that we can talk about in the area of skill expression. Let's add to it and not take away something that's creative and unique. So anyway, he does reply. He sent like a 2-page just essay worth of reply, and I didn't get back to this one. There's only so much I can do here, man. We're making a whole video about it anyway, so he's saying just that it's bad game design, essentially, that something like snap sliding is, you know, you're locking functions behind unintuitive inputs. Once again, it's the same number of inputs. This argument might have made sense for like a spring jump into a thrust and a stabilize in Halo 5 that had a lot of inputs, but everything did actually have a important function in the end of the day. And like he's saying that people are unlikely to discover it on their own. Like you discover this, I discovered this stuff on my own. Like I guess it's different from person to person, right? Like if you care about this stuff and you put the time in, you will learn intuitively how things work, mechanics, and you know, all these elements kind of fit together. That's you know, the process of it. And he's saying that a player should never be forced to consult an outside source to learn or improve. You aren't forced to. You desire it if you want to improve, right? Like if somebody plays a game and they enjoy it, fundamentally, they will consult outside sources to get better. And seeing somebody do something crazy in a game to outplay you, if you want to get better, should inspire and encourage you to seek the knowledge so you can do it too, right? Like what happened to that? It just seems like this person doesn't want to learn anything, you know, and is just, he's expecting everything to just be laid out and all the rules there, and it's all strict and rigid, and for everything to just be a defined experience that I can jump in and instantly just, you know, like fit with the top players or whatever. Like, it's like, even if you simplified the mechanics in this game, the top players are always going to find that unique, like, little niche and that little edge to get better. It's just going to be less expressive and less exciting at the top level, because the difference, it's going to be harder to spot the differences between the two. Everything's going to be insanely subtle. At least with, you know, some of the skill gaps in Infinite, there's some more noticeable and interesting, you know, differences between lower level and higher level players, because there's different ways to express those, you know, those skillful interactions. This snap sliding point is just weird to me. It said it's not snap sliding in particular he has an issue with. It's the way it exists in the game. Make it more available to everybody and see who's really more skilled. And then everyone can freely utilize all the tools to them, because skill is not determined by how much exclusive knowledge. Have you seen my YouTube channel by any chance? Like, the whole objective of my channel is to not have any of this be exclusive, is to explain the depth so that everyone has access to the technique and then face me on even ground, right? Like, it's difficult to do. That makes it skillful. I'm doing my best to make it understandable so that everybody can engage with it. If it's just easy to understand, then is it really that skillful if everybody can just do it intuitively? Like, I don't know. I think that you're hurting game balance. Now everybody's sliding around effortlessly, right? Like, the exclusive kind of, you know, unique knowledge component of it is what makes it exciting and skillful. In the end of the day, you know, that's why my channel exists. It is really just all subjective, but he just doesn't seem to appreciate the physical dexterity required in gaming and wants that to be as low and as accessible as possible. The issue is, in doing so, you create an easier game in most cases. So if your objective is the most competitive experience, you can't really circumvent the dexterity. You should appreciate and accept it, I think. Personally, I find it very exciting. There's interesting, you know, and it's your own opinion. You know, if you don't respect or appreciate that aspect of gaming and just want the more mental side, like, you're looking at chess, then, you know, go play chess. Is very mental, right? Like, it depends on the game. He does bring up chess, by the way. He said both players know all the rules and legal moves of chess, and look how long that game has lasted and how healthy it is. And that's fair. Chess is very popular, but chess and Halo are two very different games, my dude, right? Like, chess is almost entirely mental. And mind you, even the physical side of chess has grown and evolved over the years. I mean, with speed chess and the pace of play is improved, but obviously it's almost entirely mental. Halo is not that, and it's never been that. It's always been a balance of dexterity and knowledge. And logically speaking, for Halo, in regards to skill, for that to evolve, both the dexterity of the game and the knowledge of the game would need to evolve as well. Like, even if you just take the concept of like dexterity in gaming now in comparison to what it was 2 decades ago, like when Halo first came out, the whole concept of like FPS aim, like everything was entirely new. We didn't know how to aim on controller before Halo. Like, that's how I learned the whole process of it. The requirement, the bar for dexterity was much lower back then. Nowadays, aiming and shooting is pretty commonplace in any video game, right? There's the bare minimum requirement for dexterity in gaming has gone up over the years. People expect more layers now from their games. It's appreciated more now, and I think should be embraced even more so. He seems to believe that video games need to operate within this like strictly defined set of rules, and any form of unintended creativity or deviation is like automatically bad. And it's funny that we're talking about music here and instruments as well. He says, I pluck the open E string on a guitar, it's going to play an E. There's no guesswork, no trial and error. Okay, but depending on how you pluck that string or the pick you're using, it's going to produce a different sound. Or take a wind instrument like a saxophone or a trumpet. Depending on your breathing and the shape of your mouth, you can play entirely different notes and sounds while pressing the wrong keys, right? Like, there's an insane amount of flexibility, and acquiring that comes from hours and hours and hours of practice and an intimate understanding of that instrument. And the result of that, though, is a passionate connection with the instrument and with the music, right? Gaming is kind of similar in a sense that there are rules, but it's also sort of like a blank canvas, right? There is room for creative individual expression. It takes hours to understand and utilize it, but if you can, then you develop a passionate connection with the game. If you want passionate fans of your video game, you need to have an open mind to individual expression. It creates passionate fans. If everything in your game is strictly defined behind these like developer set parameters and every action has a predictable reaction, then your game is probably boring, right? Because gaming is a creative medium and you're stifling that creativity. He talks about having, more interplay. Says you can reflect rockets with the repulsor. That's very cool. Halo needs more stuff like this. I agree. The repulsor is sick. It's my favorite equipment. Part of the reason why it's so cool is because of how versatile it is and how it works with the movement in the game. Like, if you try to curb slide into repulsor or a snap slide into repulsor, they complement each other. They work together in skillful ways. And if we're talking about skill specifically, like, the repulsor is not the most skillful way to change the game, in my opinion. Like, yes, there are skillful elements to a repulsor, but it's also pretty free and pretty cheesy in some situations. Like, if you're camping behind a corner and you got one, even if Lucid walks by, you can knock him off the map and there's nothing he can do. But if you try to first shot Lucid and win him in a contest of skill, he's going to turn and burn you, right? Like, when it comes down to skill, there's other more effective ways to truly display who's the most skillful. And it's funny when I say, like, why remove layers of depth to add others? This man has the audacity to say, careful with your language. Depth is a function of interplay, and snap sliding does not create interplay. What are you saying? Depth is a sequence of back and forth interactions between the player and other game elements or other players, right? The longer this back and forth continues without the game state repeating or interaction ending, the deeper the interaction. Okay, but the depth here is in the combat. Snap sliding is a timing mix-up and a positioning tool in combat. Timing, like we had mentioned, one of the most important skills in Halo. It gives players more intimate control of their timing, another layer for counterplay, another layer to predict and react to within combat as well, lengthening the combat encounter, adding more depth and interplay within combat, right? Like, if you want the most depth in combat, honestly, take a look at Halo 5. Top level 1v1s in Halo 5, the length of the encounter is longer than any other Halo game because there's so many components that go into that dogfight. It's like a fighting game in FPS form. Every little movement, every little intricacy is all intentionally done. It's all to mind game and mix up your opponent to ensure that in the end, the best player is the one that wins. And the best player might even win definitively because only the truly skillful player will break away from that encounter on top. He finally says that the best way to add nuance would be with shooting and projectile combat as a whole, and I agree with this too. I think there's still plenty of room with Halo Infinite without changing any other component of the game. You could make shooting more challenging and more interesting. They've already made positive changes to the BR, I'd say, but every other weapon has gotten easier recently. The pros are constantly complaining about how easy and how available the sandbox is. So they clearly recognize there's room for depth in this category as well. You don't have to nerf the movement to do that. If anything, we still need a spring jump in Halo Infinite, I think. You could add to the movement in meaningful ways and make the game more skillful on both ends still, I think. Anyway, if you somehow made it this far, then my apologies. I'm a massive nerd, clearly, and I don't know when to shut up. But I love this stuff, man. I think when it comes down to a conversation of skill in Halo, both the dexterity side in fine motor control and an APM and the knowledge side of the game deserve respect and appreciation. I think there's a harmony there that can be achieved, and you can have the most skillful Halo in the end because of it. It's what makes these games so exciting and special is how all these components fit together. But anyway, there's a lot of subjectivity in it. I do feel like this paragraph from him kind of best encompasses my thought process here, though. He says, it's like when you were the first one of your friends to figure out how to throw a fireball in Street Fighter. You gained a huge advantage and stomped everyone, but you didn't tell anyone else how to do it, and because then you would lose your advantage. In a way, you and your friends aren't even playing the same games. My friends quit SF after that and never did learn how to throw a fireball. I wish I had told them. That's it right there. My YouTube channel is me telling you how to throw the damn fireball, right? Because if you had told them, they would have learned and the game would have been deeper and more interesting as a result. You would have had more fun, would have been more exciting, right? Like, we live in a much more technological world, interconnected world today, where that information, that how to do something, is more available than ever before. The objective of my channel is to make this stuff available, make it easily understandable so that we can all improve together and play a deeper, more skillful game in the end of the day, because the most skillful experience is where all the dopamine comes from, to be honest. It's what makes these games so damn fun, man. If we're talking about strictly competitive Halo, of course, Halo is fun for many different reasons. I think the love for Forge recently is good proof of that. But that's all I've got for today's discussion, guys. Quite a rant today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. What do you think of the skill gaps in Halo or skill ceiling? Would you raise it or lower it? And how would you do that? Let me know in the comments. As always, if you guys like this stuff, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out my other content. I'll see you again soon. Good luck on the way.